how did you get into the study of the biblical languages?
Yeah, great question. So when I was an undergraduate student, I had um, a time in my life where I was not following the Lord from the age of probably 16 to 20. I was really not following God and really very rebellious in many ways. And the Lord kind of broke me back to himself, and finally I turned back to him. And part of that meant I would begin reading scripture in my own everyday life. And as in the US, we have liberal arts Christian colleges, and I ended up at one of those as a student. And so here I am reading the Bible just to know the Lord and to find life in the Lord, and while simultaneously being in a college where I was required to take some Bible classes. And so I remember taking a survey of the Old Testament and survey of the New Testament class. And it was probably there for the first time I realized, oh, okay, so it's the New Testament that's written in Greek, and the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, and kind of getting that sorted out.
Yeah.
And I'd say within that first year of having turned back to the Lord, I sensed a call to ministry. And I didn't know what that would involve. I imagined I would go on and do a Master's of Divinity or similar to a BTH degree in the UK. But as I was going through my undergrad curriculum, I had options of learning languages. And so I thought, well, if I have to learn a language, let me try Biblical Greek. And I took Biblical Greek with a professor who's now at Asbury Seminary named Fred Long. And Fred Long said something very providential early in the semester of taking Greek 101. And it was this. He said, I'm going to grade you according to how you finish the semester, not how you start it. Because some of you are going to fail your first quizzes and tests miserably because you're still figuring out what it takes to learn a language. When he said that, it kind of passed over my head. But when I took the first test in Greek class, maybe about 4 or 5 weeks in, I failed that test so miserably. I had no clue what was needed to memorize vocabulary and to master paradigms and kind of figuring out the systems of how language works. And by the end of that first semester, I was figuring those sorts of things out and really enjoyed. I think I had 3 or 4 semesters of Greek during my undergraduate time. And in my final semester of my undergraduate degree, I was able to take, or final year, I was able to take just 1 semester of Biblical Hebrew. And I fell in love with Hebrew. No offense to Greek. I like Greek. But I think learning Hebrew for me was easier because I'd already gone through the hard difficulty of learning Greek and figuring out what's involved. Yeah. So the language you study second is maybe a bit easier. And then also I loved, it was just so romantic writing, the writing from right to left, the squiggly lines, and it just felt so foreign and almost romantic, and coupled with just a growing love for studying the Old Testament scriptures. So I didn't, of course, think that I was going to become an Old Testament scholar someday. I was thinking I'd be in pastoral ministry or some sort of other type of ministry, but that was really the starting point for me with both Greek and Hebrew were in my undergrad times. And it was kind of driven out of this exposure I had of a pastor growing up who would talk about biblical languages. And so I thought, well, if I may be a pastor someday, I need to start learning these. And so that's how it got started.
Cool. Yeah, and thanks also for sharing that sort of that it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think that is when we are thinking about learning languages, I like to, that's a hobby horse of mine, or PvP, I think you say that in America, that languages should be understood as learning a skill, so learning like playing the guitar, or I mean, although you're very fond of basketball, so like playing basketball, like learning how to do that well.
Yeah.
And the same thing is with languages, you have to practice a little bit all the time, and then you will reach there in the end.
And often what happens is you kind of learn a language for a season, and it's amazing how quickly you forget it. And then you have to go back and review and reteach yourself. And what's amazing is like, wow, those categories that you were initially exposed to are kind of still there. And then it's a lot quicker reacquiring it, and more of the language sticks that time around, the second time around. And, it's it's amazing how the mind works. I mean, you speak Danish, you speak English, all these other ancient languages, and somehow among our 86 billion neurons God has in our brain, we're able to have this capacity to just know over time, learn these systems. But as with everything, it takes time to build those pathways of remembering and learning and activating what you've learned.
Yeah, it's amazing how God has created our brains to be able to remember things. So in reality, when people say they have a bad memory, it's not necessarily actually because they remember lots of stuff. We all remember lots of stuff, but just sometimes it's specific things we might not be as good at remembering as others.
Yeah, that's right. And having taught Hebrew, for so I've been a professor for about 14 years now, and I'd say at least in 7 or 8 of those years, I've taught the beginning Hebrew kind of sequence at the 2 schools I've been at. And it's amazing, you see among your students, they're all wired differently. And the way that they're learning and picking up the Hebrew, may work really well for them, but it doesn't quite work as well for someone else. So they're trying different ways and sharing tips with each other on what's helping these languages stick, because it is a long process and it's kind of a uniquely tailored experience each person may want to have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I even study with people who were like amazingly gifted with languages, and they learned things like within just a couple of months. They learned a lot more than most others. But the thing is, this guy doesn't know his Greek today.
Yeah.
Because he didn't keep it up. So it's not necessarily the most gifted that will have most use out of the language.
Yeah.
It's the one who uses it.
That's a great point.
Thank you for watching this clip. If you enjoyed it, you can find another one by clicking just over here. Or if you want to watch the full episode and dive a step deeper, you can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.